Aaron and Tiffany, Governor Gordon's message during his State of the State address was relatively simple. Wyoming is strong. How do we keep it that way? That failed in the Senate today, 11-18, with one excused, and that vote coming after several senators made the decision to switch their yes votes to no's once they realized that it wasn't actually going to have the vote count that it needed to be able to move forward for introduction in the Senate.
All right, thank you, Grace. And we do have some questions for you. What were some of the reasonings given with those bills, Grace? Why did they pass or fail?
Well, when you're talking about that House Judiciary bill with the human trafficking penalties, people that I spoke with in January were feeling pretty optimistic that it would have that bipartisan support moving forward during this session. So it really isn't surprising that it received that kind of vote in committee today. But I did talk to the chairman, Dan Kirkbride, Representative Kirkbride, and he told me that it's just something that the Judiciary Committee has a heart for. And then Speaker Harshman and President Perkins both actually focused on the transparency in Wyoming state government and the leaps and bounds that Wyoming has made in making its budget available to Wyomingites across the state. And legislators actually were given a copy of the budget today on the first day of the session. And I was told in the past sometimes the appropriations chairman was the only person who had access to that at the start of the session. Now, when it comes to what the legislature is actually considering today, we've been talking about it leading up. They're looking at how to spend that $1.25 billion that was given to the state of Wyoming through the CARES Act. Now, a couple of the bills are looking at things like workers' compensation claims for employees if they think they contracted COVID-19 on the job and what that means for employers and different aspects of protection for those employers. Yeah, so the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, put on this forum last night, and what was surprising to me was how many people were there from different backgrounds. Before people were able to stand up and give testimony, Chairman Dan Kirkbride walked people through the proceedings and how to address the committee, starting with the chairman, and mentioned too that when you talk about the issue of abortion, this can be a deeply personal and sometimes divisive issue, and so just reminding people to be civil in their discourse and in this conversation. And obviously we're not going to be able to touch on every single aspect of testimony that lasted for over an hour in the committee today, but when it comes to people who are supporting this 48-hour waiting period, a lot of them drawing on personal experience and who they know and whether or not they know women who have had abortions in the past and regret them. So House Bill 113 is looking at potentially importing prescription drugs from Canada. The bill would launch a study by the Department of Health to look into how much would it cost the state. Would Wyomingites save any money on prescription drugs if we were to import some of these medications? Are there medications that are better to import from Canada? And something that I heard quite a bit going into the budget session back in February and March was that this is the people's house. That's something Speaker of the House Steve Harshman has said repeatedly, and that's one thing that's missing here today. The general public is not allowed in the Capitol building today for this special session.
And Grace, what are these bills looking to do?
Well, so there are a couple of different bills. 4 of them are mirror bills, so they're the same in the House and the Senate. One of those in particular is really looking at how can it support businesses in Wyoming. So there are a couple of different programs that it's looking at maybe setting up, and there would be different requirements when it comes to how many employees those businesses had and how much money they would be given for each employee on top of that. And so those are some of the specifics that are tied into that bill. And when it comes to some of these representatives, I spoke with them just after the lunch break earlier today, and they said that unlike other legislatures, I mean, Wyoming's is a citizen legislature, and so they are not immune to the effects of COVID-19. It's over 60 in the House and the Senate failing to get the votes needed for introduction, and then another 40 that the House or Senate didn't even consider because there just wasn't enough time before that Friday cutoff.
Grace, thank you. And then Governor Mark Gordon holding a press conference alongside some of the legislators today. What did they talk about?
Governor Gordon talking about a couple of bills, one in the House, one in the Senate, and he was alongside Senate President Drew Perkins and Speaker of the House Steve Harshman, as well as some other elected officials. And essentially what these bills are looking at is purchasing some land in the state of Wyoming. Now, aides told us that it was about 1 million acres of land that the state is considering purchasing, and with that 4 million of mineral lands essentially. But nobody could really give us an exact estimate of how much it would cost the state, saying that there just aren't appraisals on these properties, and so there's really no telling how much it would cost Wyoming to purchase these lands. But one of the reasons that they're looking at them is because they are generating revenue for the current owners, and so they think it could be a positive for Wyoming. And finally, a bill scheduled for third reading in the Senate today is that bill looking at the coal marketing program, a bill backed by Governor Mark Gordon in his State of the State address, passing in the Senate today with 28 yes votes and 2 no votes. And so it looks like that is another one that we can expect to see Governor Gordon signing in the next few weeks or so. And again, for all of your legislative updates, make sure you're staying with us here at Wyoming News Now. For now, Carrie, I'll send it back to you. He and I also spoke about tomorrow's special session for the legislature that is dealing with the CARES Act funding and what the pandemic means for the Wyoming legislature in years to come. Here's a look at that conversation. I know hindsight is always 20/20. Anything looking back now that you are maybe second guessing when it comes to setting the budget for last year, and what maybe is on the horizon for you guys when it comes to just talking about state funding for Wyoming?
Well, you probably know that I didn't actually vote for the budget. I was opposed to the budget when it came up for final vote, and consistently resisted it, saying that it was not a sustainable budget. It overly relied on an optimistic forecast of oil, and I was worried that that was just way too optimistic, and we knew that coal was going to continue to go down. And so it was clear to me that it was not a sustainable budget. It was a budget that burned into our reserves way too fast. Well, okay, hindsight, I'm not going to gloat on this, but the truth is the oil forecast that we had is not going to pan out, and our reserves will be used up even faster.
I mean, how do you use this as kind of a stepping stone for policy-making decisions moving forward?
Well, in a way, there is a silver lining to all this, because these facts are so stark that no one can deny it. We really do need to make significant changes. There are lots of people that have said, don't raise taxes until you cut government first. We're going to get government cuts, I'm afraid, and lots of them. It's going to be very substantial. And they're going to be enormous. To make it work, you can imagine all sorts of very enormous cuts that'll have to come in every single program in every area of Wyoming. And at the same time, we're still going to need to diversify our tax structure, even more than, we need to diversify our businesses, certainly. But if you bring in businesses and they don't contribute to the tax structure in Wyoming, it's a net loss.
Just talk to me about maybe what you feel like you and your colleagues are trying to bring with you when it comes to your personal experiences, and trying to figure out how you're going to manage $1.25 billion from the CARES Act. I mean, that's a huge chunk of money to divvy out and use responsibly. How do you feel like you and your colleagues are prepared to do that?
Well, let me tell you, my colleagues are very capable. They are fabulous, great people, and they're ordinary citizens, and they have businesses and connections to communities all across Wyoming. So they know what's going on in their communities, and they feel it. And some of them are in business like I am, or and that'll be on our minds as we work this special session. But that's not a bad thing. That keeps us connected. There's always controversy. We butt heads a little bit sometimes, and some of us, like myself, worry about the process that this is happening, and maybe thinking we need to take more time with it. But I have the greatest respect for my colleagues. They will rise to the occasion, and we will get this done.
Tomorrow's special session is going to be a virtual session. It starts at 8 in the morning and will continue into Saturday if necessary. The proclamation from the governor requires the first special session to be conducted electronically, so it will be held over Zoom and broadcast to the public using YouTube. Even legislators in the Capitol will be taking part in the meeting on their laptops. If they can't be socially distanced within the chambers, they will be put in committee rooms and other office spaces. And because of social distancing guidelines as well as concerns for people's safety, the public will not be allowed in the Capitol. They are encouraged to contact legislators directly or call a hotline to take part.
Wyoming could be seeing higher costs at hotels starting next year.
Grace Folk has more from the Capitol after the Senate passed a bill that would set up a statewide lodging tax.
The final vote on House Bill 134 in the Senate, 16 yes, 13 no, with one conflict. This coming on the final day of week 3 of this session.
And while I know it does raise fees, it's a fee-raising bill, and I know that made it a tough vote for our legislators. But you know, at the end of the day, what worked for me and what I think worked for them is that they understood the fundamental principle that if you've got a good investment, you make it. And this was a good investment for the people of Wyoming.
The bill sets up a statewide lodging tax that will fund tourism in Wyoming. Not every legislator wanted to see everyone paying the tax. A few amendments failing, trying to exempt Wyomingites from paying. Supporters of the bill have said that it targets tourists, but not everyone agrees on that.
And if this is the only tax we're going to raise all year, this does nothing to correct the structural deficit. This money's not going to go to education. It's not going to go to roads or anything like that. It's just going to a pot of money for the tourism industry to spend on advertising. And I don't think it's the right thing to do.
Now the House and the Senate will have to agree on the amendments before it heads to Governor Mark Gordon's desk for either a signature or veto. A lodging tax is the only tax Governor Gordon said he would support before the start of the 2020 session. Reporting for Wyoming News Now, I'm Grace Folk. Let's start with House Bill 63. It's proposing raising the fuel tax in Wyoming. Looking at the bill, it's proposing raising the fuel tax by about 3 cents, which Senator Case thinks has enough support to pass through the legislature this session. This tax is estimated to bring in about $20 million a year. If it passes, that money would go to fund highways and other street projects around the state. And a portion of taxes collected also goes towards improving snowmobile, boating, and off-roading trails and facilities. So those state parks accounts will be seeing an increase in funding too.
The way that's been described is 3 cents, which is really the inflation since we last increased the fuel tax by 10 cents.
And another tax bill, House Bill 64, is looking at imposing a state corporate income tax. A similar bill was proposed and failed in 2019. It's proposing a 7% tax for businesses with more than 100 shareholders. According to the bill, 100% of what's collected through the corporate income tax will go back to public schools in the state. Senator Case thinks that this corporate income tax is really a great idea for dealing with the declining revenue for mineral royalties. Senator Case says the tax will only hit companies that aren't contributing to taxes already, and he says it also avoids taxing smaller companies that didn't receive federal tax breaks. Senator Case doesn't think this bill will actually pass this year, but he does think the idea of a corporate income tax will gain momentum. The 2020 budget session is just around the corner. It's starting February 10th. Governor Gordon may only be favoring that lodging tax, but we'll see what lawmakers have to say in just a few short weeks. Hemp is being planted in Wyoming. Justin Leffler with Green Tree Ag said they are putting seed in the ground this week in Goshen County. It's been a multi-year process, but the industry has made progress in the last year to make this happen. In 2019, House Bill 171 was passed by the Wyoming Legislature. Here's a look at what Leffler had to say during the 2019 session.
We have a really unique opportunity to get on the ground floor of this, build an ag economy or add to our ag economy that can help our farmers in our state.
Now, getting hemp planted in Wyoming did take longer than some were hoping for, but earlier this year, Governor Mark Gordon made it possible for farmers to start applying for permits after the state had its plan approved by the USDA. Representative Bunky Laux was the sponsor of House Bill 171 and heard from farmers that they were really looking forward to a crop like this that they could make a profit on. And that process is now underway. It was reported the first license in the state was issued in Powell in March, and now planting has started in Goshen County.